Woman poses for selfie during vacation. Then her husband zooms in and drops the phone in shock. The mountain air felt different. Cleaner. Like each breath washed away a little more of the city's residue that had accumulated in Daniel's lungs over the past grueling months. Standing on the wooden deck of their rented lodge, he closed his eyes and inhaled deeply, letting the scent of pine and wilderness fill him. First real breath I've taken in months, he whispered to himself. Behind him, the door to their cabin creaked open. Melanie stepped out, her dark hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, wearing the oversized sweater he'd always loved, the soft blue one that made her eyes look like fragments of sky. She carried 2 steaming mugs. Hot chocolate, she said, handing him one. With a splash of something extra. She winked, and Daniel caught the faint whisper of whiskey rising with the steam. You know me too well, he said, accepting the mug and wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Together they gazed out at the spectacular view, jagged mountains piercing the horizon, valleys draped in emerald forest, and not another soul in sight. Whitewater Lodge was exactly what the travel website had promised: remote, rustic luxury tucked away in the northern wilderness. No cell service except for a weak signal near the main building. No television. No constant pings of incoming emails or text messages. Just wilderness, silence, and the person he'd been too busy to properly see for months. Think you can last 2 weeks without checking your work email? Melanie asked, a hint of challenge in her voice. Daniel's jaw tightened reflexively. 3 months ago, he wouldn't have considered it possible. 3 months ago, before the panic attack in the board meeting, his heart thundering in his chest, sweat soaking through his dress shirt, the horrifying certainty that he was dying right there in front of the quarterly projections. The doctor had called it burnout, had written severe occupational stress on the medical leave papers, but Daniel knew what it really was: the slow-motion collapse of everything he thought mattered. I'm not even bringing my laptop inside, he promised, squeezing her closer. It can stay locked in the car trunk until we leave. Melanie looked up at him, searching his face for signs of insincerity. Finding none, her expression softened. I've missed you, she said quietly. Even when you were physically there, you weren't really there. The words stung, but Daniel nodded. I know. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Just be here. Now. She tapped her mug against his in a makeshift toast. To 2 weeks of actually seeing each other. Daniel nodded, the lump in his throat making words difficult. How long had it been since they'd really talked? Since they'd spent time together without him mentally cataloging tasks he needed to complete, or emails he needed to send? Too long. The first 3 days passed in a blur of small, perfect moments. Hiking trails that wound through primeval forests. Afternoons spent reading books they'd been meaning to get to for years. Evenings in front of the stone fireplace, playing cards or simply talking, rediscovering the art of conversation without distractions. Daniel felt parts of himself awakening that had been dormant for too long, like a garden finally receiving rain after a drought. On the 4th day, they decided to explore the small town 20 minutes down the mountain. It was barely more than a main street with a handful of shops catering to tourists and seasonal visitors, a general store, a cafe, a gift shop selling local crafts, and a surprisingly good bookstore run by a retired professor who'd escaped city life decades ago. You're at Whitewater Lodge? The bookstore owner asked as he rang up their purchases. Beautiful spot. Been there since the 1930s, you know. Used to be a hunting lodge for the wealthy before it was converted to vacation rentals. It's perfect, Melanie said. Feels like we're the only people in the world up there. The old man smiled, a peculiar expression crossing his weather-lined face. Not quite, but close enough. There's another cabin about a mile through the woods from yours, but the fellow there keeps to himself. Been living up here year-round for a few years now. Strange duck, but harmless. A hermit? Daniel asked, suddenly curious. Something like that. Former city type, from what little he's shared. Comes into town for supplies once a month. Pays cash for everything. The old man shrugged. Some people come to these mountains to find something. Others come to leave something behind. Daniel nodded, oddly discomfited by the man's words. Which category did he and Melanie fall into? Were they running towards something, or away from something? They stopped for coffee at the small cafe before heading back to the lodge. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the worn wooden porch of the main lodge building as they returned. Something about the golden light made Melanie pause. "Wait," she said, fishing her phone from her pocket. "This light is gorgeous. Let me get a picture of us." Daniel groaned good-naturedly. "You and your selfies." "Just one," she insisted, positioning herself with the rustic entrance of the lodge behind her. "Actually, why don't you take one of just me first, then we'll do one together." Daniel took her phone and stepped back a few paces. Melanie posed in front of the lodge entrance, the weathered sign reading, "Whitewater Lodge, EST 1932, visible above her head. The forest line began not far behind, dark pines standing like sentinels at the edge of the cleared area. "Smile," Daniel said, and snapped several photos as Melanie shifted positions slightly. "Let me see," she said, reaching for the phone. "What, you don't trust my photography skills?" he teased, holding it just out of reach. "I've seen your photography skills," she laughed. "I want to make sure my hair doesn't look like I've been electrocuted." They scrolled through the photos together, Melanie selecting a few favorites before they took several together, arms wrapped around each other, cheeks pressed close, smiles that, for the first time in months, reached both their eyes. Later, after dinner at the lodge's small restaurant, they returned to their cabin. Melanie disappeared into the bathroom for her nightly routine while Daniel built a fire in the stone fireplace, the familiar task of arranging kindling and logs soothing in its simplicity. Once the flames were crackling steadily, he settled onto the bed, propping himself up against the headboard. Almost without thinking, he reached for Melanie's phone on the nightstand. They knew each other's passcodes, had never seen a reason for secrets between them. He opened her photo gallery, smiling as he scrolled through the day's images. Seeing their genuine smiles in the selfies made something ease in his chest. Maybe they really were finding their way back to each other. He tapped on one of the solo shots of Melanie, her auburn hair catching the golden hour light, her smile relaxed in a way it hadn't been in months. Something about the composition made him want to see the details better. He spread his fingers on the screen, zooming in to focus on her face. But as he zoomed, his eyes caught something in the background. Behind Melanie, near the edge of the forest line, a figure stood partially concealed by the shadows of the trees. A man, it seemed, wearing what looked like a faded baseball cap and a heavy jacket despite the mild afternoon temperature. Curious, Daniel zoomed in further, the image becoming more pixelated but the figure still distinguishable. The man was bearded, his stance suggesting he was deliberately keeping to the shadows, watching the lodge. Something about his posture felt familiar, triggering a vague discomfort in Daniel's mind. He adjusted the zoom, focusing on the man's visible arm. The sleeve of his jacket was pushed up, revealing a forearm covered with what appeared to be a tattoo. Daniel squinted, trying to make out the design through the pixelation. A fish. No, a koi fish, orange and white, riding a stylized blue wave that wrapped around the forearm. Daniel's blood turned to ice. That tattoo. He knew that tattoo intimately. Had been there the day it was inked, had helped design it, had the matching one on his own shoulder blade. It was Caleb's tattoo, the one he'd gotten to commemorate their first successful business venture together. Caleb, who had been his best friend since college. Caleb, who had supposedly drowned during a solo kayaking trip 5 years ago. Caleb, whose body had never been recovered. The phone slipped from Daniel's suddenly numb fingers, clattering to the hardwood floor. The sound echoed in the cabin like a gunshot. "Dan? You okay?" Melanie called from the bathroom, her voice muffled by the door. Daniel couldn't answer. His throat had closed up, his heart hammering against his ribs like it was trying to escape. Because if that was Caleb in the photo, and there was no mistaking that tattoo, then everything Daniel thought he knew about the past 5 years was a lie. And somehow, impossibly, his Finnish best friend was here, watching them, from the shadows of these remote mountains. Daniel? Melanie's voice grew closer as she emerged from the bathroom, steam billowing behind her. Did you drop something? Daniel couldn't move. His gaze remained fixed on the spot where the phone had fallen, though his mind was 1,000 miles away, or more accurately, 5 years in the past. Hey, Melanie said, reaching down to retrieve her phone. What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. A ghost. The word echoed in his head with cruel irony. He had seen a ghost, or rather, a man who should be one. His voice cracked. It's nothing. Just thought I saw something strange in one of your photos. Melanie glanced at her phone screen, which had gone dark. What photo? Daniel swallowed hard. Some instinct, some primal sense of self-preservation, warned him not to reveal what he'd seen. Not yet. Not until he understood what it meant. Just a shadow I thought was a person. Trick of the light. He lied, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack his face. Spooked myself. Melanie studied him for a moment, her brow slightly furrowed, before nodding slowly. This place is pretty isolated. Easy to get jumpy. She set the phone back on the nightstand and slipped under the covers beside him. But that's why we love it, right? No people, no distractions. Right. Daniel echoed hollowly. Sleep evaded him that night. Long after Melanie's breathing had deepened into the steady rhythm of slumber, Daniel stared at the ceiling, his mind racing. Images of Caleb flashed through his consciousness. Caleb laughing at college graduation, Caleb hunched over his keyboard during their startup days, Caleb raising a toast at Daniel and Melanie's wedding, Caleb's funeral. The empty casket because the current had been too strong, the search efforts abandoned after 10 days. The devastating grief that had nearly destroyed Daniel, losing his closest friend without even the closure of a body to bury. Around 3 a.m, Daniel carefully slid out of bed and retrieved Melanie's phone. In the bathroom, door closed and light dimmed, he once again opened the photo. There was no mistaking it. The distinctive koi fish design swimming up a stylized blue wave. He'd helped Caleb design it himself. They'd gotten matching tattoos after their first successful project together, though Daniel's was on his shoulder blade while Caleb had chosen his forearm. Business brothers. Caleb had called them, drunk on success and celebratory whiskey. But beyond the tattoo, now that he was looking more carefully, Daniel could see it was unmistakably Caleb's face beneath the beard and cap. Older, weathered, but the same sharp jawline, the same slight asymmetry to his features. Daniel zoomed in further, straining to see details in the pixelated image. Caleb appeared to be watching the lodge, watching them, with an intensity that sent chills down Daniel's spine. Not the casual glance of a passerby, but the focused gaze of someone deliberately observing. Someone hiding. Why would Caleb fake his death? What had happened 5 years ago on that river? And why, the question that kept circling back like a predator, why would he be here, now, watching them from the shadows? Daniel's mind raced through possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. Had Caleb been in some kind of trouble? Had he been running from something? Or someone? The two of them had worked for the same financial analytics firm before starting their own venture. It had been demanding work, but nothing that would necessitate such a drastic measure as faking one's death. Unless a half-forgotten conversation surfaced in Daniel's memory. 2 weeks before his disappearance, Caleb had been uncharacteristically somber during their weekly beer night. "What if you found something?" he'd asked, staring into his glass. "Something that could destroy people? Powerful people. Would you keep quiet to stay safe, or speak up and risk everything?" Daniel had assumed it was hypothetical, one of Caleb's philosophical thought experiments he occasionally indulged in. He'd given some glib answer about always choosing truth, and they'd moved on. Had it not been hypothetical after all? His fingers shaking, Daniel zoomed in once more on Caleb's face in the photo. There was something in his expression, a hardness that hadn't been there before. The Caleb he'd known had been quick to laugh, eternally optimistic. This man looked haunted. With a sudden jolt of clarity, Daniel realized the implications. If Caleb had faked his death and was hiding here, in this remote wilderness, then his appearance was no coincidence. He must have known they were coming. Which meant he had been keeping tabs on them all these years. Or someone had told him. Daniel's gaze drifted to the bedroom door, behind which Melanie slept peacefully. The same Melanie who had suggested this specific lodge for their getaway. Who had insisted on this particular cabin, even though there had been others available. Who had positioned herself so precisely for that selfie, with the forest line clearly visible behind her. Had it been deliberate? Did she know? The phone suddenly felt like it was burning his palm. Daniel shut off the screen and leaned against the cool tile wall, his heart hammering. He needed answers, but even more than that, he needed to be careful about how he sought them. If Caleb was alive and hiding, there was a reason. If Melanie knew something, there was a reason for her silence too. Whatever web of secrets and lies surrounded his supposedly finished friend, Daniel was now caught in it, and his next move could either unravel the truth or put them all in danger. Morning arrived with cruel brightness. Daniel had barely slept, his mind churning with questions that had no answers. He watched Melanie as she slept, studying her face for any sign of deception, but found only the peaceful features of the woman he'd loved for 8 years. "You're staring," she murmured, her eyes still closed. "Everything okay?" "Just appreciating the view," he replied, the lie bitter on his tongue. Over breakfast, Daniel suggested they explored different hiking trails. "The eastern path looks interesting," he said casually, knowing it would take them in the direction where he'd spotted Caleb in the photo. "I was thinking we could try the waterfall trail," Melanie countered. "The lodge manager said it's spectacular this time of year." Daniel felt a flicker of suspicion. Was she deliberately steering him away? "We could do the waterfall tomorrow. I really want to see those old-growth forests on the east side." Something crossed Melanie's face, hesitation, before she nodded. "Sure, whatever you want." They set out after breakfast, Melanie seemingly oblivious to Daniel's inner turmoil as they hiked. He kept his senses alert, scanning the trees for any sign of movement, any flash of a familiar face. But the forest remained still save for birdsong and the occasional rustling of small animals in the underbrush. After the first day's search yielded nothing, Daniel grew more determined. The following morning, he claimed to have a headache. "You go ahead with whatever you had planned," he told Melanie. "I think I'll just rest here, maybe walk around the lodge grounds when I feel better." Concern filled her eyes. "Are you sure? I could stay." No, he insisted. "It's probably just altitude or something. Go enjoy yourself." Once she was gone, Daniel began his systematic search of the area surrounding the lodge. He checked every trail, every clearing, working in an expanding circle from where the figure had been spotted in the photo. By mid-afternoon, exhaustion and frustration had set in. Maybe he'd been wrong. Maybe it wasn't Caleb after all, just someone with a similar tattoo. But as he rounded the back of a storage shed near the edge of the property, Daniel froze. There, splitting firewood with practiced swings of an axe, was a bearded man wearing a faded red flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up. On his forearm, clear as day, the distinctive koi fish tattoo. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. 5 years of grief, of unanswered questions, of moving on, all rendered meaningless in an instant. "Caleb," he whispered. The axe paused mid-swing. The man's shoulders tensed, but he didn't turn around. "You should leave, Daniel." The voice was rougher than he remembered, but unmistakably Caleb's. "Pretend you never saw me." "Pretend?" Daniel's voice cracked with sudden anger. "Like I've been pretending to mourn you for 5 years? Like I pretended when I delivered your eulogy? When I comforted your parents?" Caleb finally turned, and Daniel was shocked by the change in his friend. Beyond the beard and weathered skin, his eyes held a wariness that bordered on fear. "I'm sorry," Caleb said simply. "But this isn't a game. You need to leave. Now." Instead, Daniel stepped closer. "We thought you were finished. I thought you were finished. That was the point." Caleb glanced nervously toward the trees. "And I still need to be finished. To everyone." "Why?" Daniel demanded, closing the distance between them. What the hell happened, Caleb? For a moment, it seemed Caleb might flee. Then resignation crossed his features, and he nodded toward a small cabin barely visible through the trees. Not here, he muttered. Inside. The cabin was sparse but neat. A single room with a kitchenette, a bed, a desk covered with papers and an ancient laptop. The windows were covered with heavy curtains despite the daylight outside. 5 minutes, Caleb said, checking his watch. Then you go back to your wife and your vacation and forget you ever saw me. That's not happening. Daniel crossed his arms. Not until I get answers. Caleb ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made Daniel's chest ache with the ghost of their friendship. You always were stubborn, he sighed. Fine. The short version, I found something. Something I wasn't supposed to find. At Meridian Financial? Caleb nodded. The executives were running a scheme, using client data to manipulate markets. Not just unethical, illegal. Criminal. I gathered evidence, was going to blow the whistle. His eyes darkened. Then my brakes failed on the way home one night. Not an accident. So you faked your death, Daniel said, the pieces falling into place. The kayaking trip. It was that or actually die, Caleb confirmed. I had help disappearing. The words hung in the air between them before Daniel finally asked the question burning in his mind. Melanie. She knew, didn't she? Caleb's silence was answer enough. She was the last person I contacted, he finally admitted. I needed someone I could trust, someone with no obvious connection to my work. Your wife, she helped me vanish. The betrayal hit Daniel like a physical blow. 5 years of grief, of watching Melanie console him through the loss of his best friend, all while she knew the truth. Why here? Daniel managed to ask. Why now? I've been moving around, Caleb explained. But I've been tracking the investigation from afar. Things are coming to a head. I needed to warn. A sound outside made Caleb freeze mid-sentence. In 2 quick strides, he was at the window, peering through a slit in the curtains. She's back, he said tensely. Earlier than expected. Daniel felt dizzy with conflicting emotions. I need to talk to her. Daniel, Caleb grabbed his arm. Be careful. This isn't just about me anymore. It never was. The implication was clear. The danger that had forced Caleb into hiding could now be Daniel's as well. Daniel returned to the lodge with his mind in turmoil, each step heavier than the last. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the lawn as he approached their cabin. Through the window, he could see Melanie moving about inside, unaware that her world, their world, was about to shatter. He paused at the door, hand on the knob, gathering courage. 5 years of lies. 5 years of watching her comfort him through grief she knew was unnecessary. How could someone live with such a deception? When he finally entered, Melanie greeted him with a smile that faltered when she saw his expression. Dan? What's wrong? I saw him, Daniel said simply, watching her face. I saw Caleb. The color drained from Melanie's cheeks. Her hand, reaching for a glass of water, froze midair. For several seconds she said nothing, her eyes locked with his in a silent battle of wills. I don't know what you're talking about, she finally managed, but her voice trembled. Don't. Daniel's voice was sharp enough to make her flinch. I found him living in a cabin less than a mile from here. I've seen the tattoo in your photo. And he told me everything. Something in Melanie seemed to collapse then. She sank onto the edge of the bed, shoulders hunched, looking suddenly smaller. How much did he tell you? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. That he discovered corruption at Meridian. That someone tried to finish him. That you helped him disappear. Each statement felt like a physical blow as he delivered it. That my wife has been lying to me for 5 years. Melanie looked up, tears welling in her eyes. It wasn't like that, Daniel. You have to understand. Understand what? He demanded, anger finally breaking through the shock. That while I was devastated, thinking my best friend was finished, both of you knew the truth? That you watched me grieve and said nothing? I was protecting you. Melanie stood suddenly, her own anger flaring. Do you have any idea what Caleb uncovered? What those people are capable of? They would have finished him if they'd found him. They still would. So you decided I couldn't handle the truth? Daniel paced the small room, unable to stay still. That I was too weak to be trusted? It wasn't about weakness, Melanie countered. It was about keeping you safe. About keeping both of us safe. The less you knew, the safer you were. Daniel stopped pacing and stared at her. Tell me everything. Now. Melanie took a deep breath, resignation settling over her features. 5 years ago, Caleb called me in the middle of the night. He was terrified, rambling about data manipulation, offshore accounts, client information being sold. Said he'd found evidence that executives at Meridian were involved in massive financial crimes. Why you? Why not me? Pain flashed across Melanie's face. Because of where you worked, Daniel. Because Northstar Technologies was one of the companies implicated in Caleb's evidence. The revelation hit Daniel like a physical blow. Northstar, his company. The place he'd built his career after leaving Meridian. That's impossible, he whispered. Your CEO, Richardson, was involved with Meridian executives. They were using client financial data and proprietary algorithms to manipulate markets. Billions of dollars, Daniel. And they silenced whistleblowers. Permanently. Daniel thought of his CEO's sudden interest in him after Caleb's death, the rapid promotions, the mentorship. Had it all been to keep him close, to watch him? Caleb showed me evidence, Melanie continued. Then his brakes failed. He knew they'd keep coming for him. We planned his disappearance together, the kayaking accident. I helped him get new identification money. We agreed it was safer if you didn't know. For 5 years? Daniel's voice cracked. And this vacation? This wasn't a coincidence, was it? Melanie shook her head. Caleb contacted me last month. Said things were moving, that the feds were finally building a case against Meridian and Northstar. He thought. She hesitated. He thought it might be time to bring you in. To explain everything before it all became public. Daniel laughed bitterly. So this romantic getaway was what, a setup? A convenient way to reveal my finished friend is actually alive? It wasn't like that. Melanie protested. I love you, Daniel. I've always loved you. But this was bigger than us. People have died. Caleb nearly died. And what about our marriage? Was that a lie too? The question had been festering since his confrontation with Caleb. No! Melanie reached for him, but Daniel stepped back. Everything between us has been real. I've just been carrying this secret to protect you. Daniel shook his head, trying to process everything. His best friend alive. His wife complicit in a massive deception. His company involved in criminal activity. It was too much. I need to know one thing, he said finally. Were you and Caleb ever? No, Melanie said firmly. Never. We were friends because of you. Nothing more. Relief washed through him, followed immediately by shame for even suspecting her. But the betrayal still cut deep. What happens now? He asked, suddenly exhausted. That depends, a new voice answered from the doorway. They both turned to find Caleb standing there, tension radiating from his posture. Someone else saw Melanie's selfie, he said grimly. We have company at the lodge. The kind that doesn't leave witnesses. Daniel felt cold dread seep into his bones as the final piece clicked into place. Their lives were now in danger, and the peaceful mountain retreat had just become a trap. Get away from the windows, Caleb ordered, moving swiftly into the cabin. He closed the door behind him and drew the curtains. Pack only what you need. We have maybe 20 minutes. Who is it? Daniel asked, already moving to grab essentials. His name is Vance. Martin Vance. Meridian's unofficial cleaner. Caleb's voice was tight with controlled fear. He handles problems that can't be solved through legal channels. How did he find us? Melanie asked, throwing clothes into a backpack. Your selfie, Caleb explained grimly. You posted it to your private Instagram. But Richardson follows you, has been monitoring your accounts for years. Daniel shot Melanie an incredulous look. You posted it online? It was set to close friends only, she protested. I just wanted to show my sister we were having a good time. They've had facial recognition software tracking from my face for years, Caleb said. Even with the beard, once they enhanced the image in the background. A twig snapped outside, and all three froze. Caleb motioned for silence, moving stealthily to peer through a gap in the curtains. Black SUV at the main lodge, he whispered. 2 men. Vance and probably his partner, Diaz. What's the plan? Daniel asked, surprising himself with how calm he sounded. We take my truck, Caleb replied. It's parked behind my cabin with emergency supplies. We go off-grid until we can reach my FBI contact. FBI? Daniel's eyebrows shot up. I've been working with them for months, Caleb explained. Building a case. They're close to having enough for arrests, but not quite there yet. And if these men catch us before we reach your truck? Melanie's voice trembled slightly. Caleb patted his jacket pocket. I'm not unprepared. The implication hung heavily in the air. Caleb was armed. The realization that his once carefree friend now carried a gun spoke volumes about the danger they faced. As they finished gathering their things, the lights in the cabin suddenly went out. Outside, they could hear shouts from the main lodge. The power was out everywhere. They've cut the lines, Caleb muttered. Standard procedure. Isolate, then hunt. Daniel felt a surge of anger. His peaceful retreat had become a nightmare, his past and present colliding violently. I'm tired of running from shadows, he said. What exactly do you have on these people, Caleb? Evidence of market manipulation, insider trading, corporate espionage. Caleb ticked off on his fingers. But the worst? 3 whistleblowers who accidentally died after threatening to expose them. Including Jeremy Foster, remember him? Daniel did remember. Foster had been a brilliant analyst who supposedly committed suicide 4 years ago. The company had made a show of mourning, even established a scholarship in his name. This goes beyond corrupt executives, Daniel, Caleb continued. They've been selling financial algorithms to foreign entities, compromising national security. Your company's software, the security protocols you helped design, they'd been using it as a backdoor into systems. Daniel felt sick. The projects he'd been so proud of, the work he'd poured his soul into, all potentially weaponized. We need to move, Caleb urged, peering out at the darkening forest. Follow me, stay low, and... The window shattered inward, spraying glass across the room. Melanie screamed as a metal canister bounced across the floor, immediately spewing thick smoke. Go! Back door! Caleb shouted, pulling a handgun from his jacket. They stumbled out into the evening air, coughing and disoriented. The forest loomed dark and foreboding ahead of them. This way, Caleb directed, leading them towards a narrow trail that disappeared into the trees. Stay close. They ran, branches whipping at their faces. Behind them, shouts echoed from the cabin. The crack of a gunshot splintered the twilight, sending birds scattering from the trees. Daniel gripped Melanie's hand tightly as they followed Caleb deeper into the forest. The familiar path he'd walked just that morning now felt alien and threatening in the growing darkness. There! Caleb pointed ahead to where a dirt road curved through the trees. My truck's just beyond that ridge. As they crested the hill, Daniel's heart sank. The road below was empty, no truck in sight. Looking for this? A smooth voice called from behind them. They spun to find a tall man in a dark suit standing calmly on the path. Despite the wilderness setting, he looked immaculate, as if he just stepped out of a board meeting. In his hand, he dangled a set of keys. Mr. Voss? The man nodded at Caleb. 5 years is a long time to play finished. His cold gaze shifted to Daniel and Melanie. Mr. and Mrs. Carter. I apologize for interrupting your vacation. Vance, Caleb said, his voice deadly quiet. How did you find the truck? The man smiled thinly. You're not the only one with friends in remote places. He gestured with his free hand, and another man emerged from the trees, this one shorter, muscular, with a gun trained steadily on them. Diaz, escort our friends back to their cabin, Vance ordered. We have much to discuss before this unfortunate situation is resolved. Daniel felt Melanie trembling beside him. He squeezed her hand, mind racing for a way out. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of options. Now, Mr. Voss, Vance continued, his voice almost conversational. Why don't you slowly place your weapon on the ground? Unless you'd prefer I start with Mrs. Carter? Caleb's jaw clenched as he carefully set his gun down. Excellent, Vance smiled. Now, shall we discuss the location of those files you've been so carefully collecting? As they were marched back toward the cabins, Daniel locked eyes with Caleb. A silent message passed between them. This wasn't over. Not yet. Daniel might have spent 5 years in the dark, but he was done being a pawn in someone else's game. Whatever happened next, he would fight, for the truth, for justice, and for a future free from shadows. Back at the cabin, Vance settled into the armchair like he was there for a friendly visit. Diaz stood by the door, guns still trained on them. Outside, darkness had fully descended, with only the moon illuminating the remote lodge grounds. 5 years of cat and mouse, Vance said, examining Caleb with clinical interest. I must admit, I'm almost impressed. Almost. What do you want? Daniel asked, standing protectively near Melanie. The files, of course. Vance smiled thinly. Mr. Voss has been quite the collector of our indiscretions. We know they're encrypted and stored somewhere secure. All we need is the access key. Caleb remained silent, his expression unreadable. Perhaps some motivation? Vance nodded to Diaz, who stepped forward and pressed his gun against Melanie's temple. Wait. Daniel's heart hammered in his chest. I can help you. I designed security protocols for Northstar. If the files are encrypted with anything related to our systems, I can crack it. Vance's eyebrows rose slightly. How convenient. The loyal employee offering assistance. His tone hardened. Or is this a ploy? It's no ploy. Daniel continued, mind racing. Caleb and I used to work on encryption together. I know how he thinks. But I need my laptop from the car. Vance considered this, then nodded to Diaz. Get it. Don't try anything clever, Mr. Carter. The consequences would be unfortunate. As Diaz left, Daniel caught Caleb's gaze. A silent understanding passed between them. Daniel was playing for time. You know, Daniel, Vance said conversationally. Richardson always spoke highly of you. Such a shame you got caught in this mess. A mess you created, Daniel replied, anger burning through his fear. How many people have died to protect your profits? Business has casualties. Vance shrugged. Nothing personal. Diaz returned with the laptop. Daniel took it, fingers flying across the keyboard as he booted it up. I'll need Caleb's access details, he said. No games, Vance warned. The username is Phoenix7, Caleb said reluctantly. The password. He hesitated. The password is Midnight Sale 21. Daniel recognized the code immediately. During college, they developed a system. Phoenix meant emergency, and the number indicated which backup plan to activate. 7 was their most desperate option. Activate everything. Accessing now, Daniel announced, typing rapidly. He wasn't attempting to decrypt anything. Instead, he was activating his own corporate access, logging into Northstar's secure server with his executive credentials. 5 years at the company had given him access to nearly everything, including the evidence that Caleb had been trying to expose. If it existed, it would be buried in the executive archives. What's taking so long? Vance demanded. Encryption this sophisticated takes time to crack, Daniel replied, continuing to search through directories. Then he found it, a hidden folder labeled Contingency Assets. Inside were hundreds of documents, emails, and financial records. Caleb had been right all along. Almost there, Daniel murmured, copying the files and simultaneously sending them to 3 destinations: the FBI's Cybercrime Division, whose contact information he found in Caleb's encrypted notes, a major news organization, and most crucially, Richardson's corporate rivals, who would waste no time using the information. "Got it," he announced, turning the screen toward Vance. "Everything Caleb collected is here." Vance leaned forward eagerly, his usual composure slipping. That momentary distraction was all they needed. Caleb lunged for Diaz, grappling for the gun. The weapon discharged, the bullet splintering wood instead of flesh. Melanie grabbed a nearby lamp, smashing it across Vance's head as he reached for his own weapon. Chaos erupted. Daniel slammed his laptop shut and swung it hard at Vance, connecting with his jaw. The man crumpled to the floor. Across the room, Caleb and Diaz wrestled for control of the gun. "Daniel!" Caleb shouted. "The window!" Daniel grabbed Melanie's hand and they dove through the already broken window just as another shot rang out. Behind them, Caleb finally wrenched the gun from Diaz's grasp and followed them into the night. They ran blindly through the forest, the sounds of pursuit fading behind them. Caleb led them to a hidden trail, then to a secondary vehicle he'd concealed for emergencies, a battered old Jeep covered with branches. "The files?" Caleb gasped as they sped down the mountain road. "Sent," Daniel confirmed. "To everyone. It's over, Caleb. They can't bury this anymore." By dawn, they had reached the city. Daniel's phone, which he'd left off to avoid tracking, exploded with notifications when he finally powered it on. The news was already breaking, one of the biggest financial scandals in decades. Corporate executives were being arrested, Northstar's stock was in freefall, and Richardson had reportedly fled the country. "What now?" Melanie asked, her hand finding Daniel's. "Now we disappear," Caleb said grimly. "Until the dust settles. They still have friends in high places." Daniel looked at his wife, then at his resurrected best friend. 5 years of lies, but also 5 years of protection. Of sacrifice. The anger was still there, but alongside it, understanding was beginning to grow. "Together," he decided. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." 1 year later, a woman posed for another selfie. Behind her stretched a coastline of white sand and turquoise water. In the background, barely visible, 2 men sat at a beach bar, their appearances subtly altered. One with shorter hair and glasses, the other clean-shaven with sun-darkened skin. The caption read simply, "New beginnings. New names. Same family." The truth had cost them their old lives. Richardson and several executives had been convicted, but Vance and others like him remained at large, nursing grudges and seeking revenge. But as Daniel, now known as Eric, looked at the photo Melanie had just taken, he found he didn't regret a thing. The truth had set them free, even as it had forced them into hiding. Their new life was smaller, simpler, but built on honesty instead of lies. He caught Caleb's eye across the table and raised his glass in a silent toast. To friendship. To survival. To the power of a single photograph that had changed everything. And somewhere in the digital cloud, that first fateful selfie remained, a reminder that sometimes the most important things are hidden in the background, waiting to be discovered by those brave enough to look closer.